I can't do anything about it anyway. And that's kind of how we were. Once we left, we were just like, all right, well, I have 240.
Yeah.
And we had no idea, though, that an additional $90,000, $100,000
Right.
of interest would just accrue so quickly in 6-7 years. So we really felt like we were really behind the 8 ball. We were broke. It was really difficult for a 2-physician household like us to be like, wait, this is not consumer debt, right? This is
Right.
not us buying Jordans and she buying whatever the equivalent would be. This is not, I have a fancy car. We had nothing really to show for it except for our degrees. And that was it.
You've made a great point. When you go off to college, most of us don't have the education. So we are really just signing the paperwork and then have to deal with the consequences later. But I'm curious to hear, though, when you guys first had that conversation and you realized that together you had over $600,000 of debt, how was that?
Well, I first realized I had $330,000 of debt. And then she convinced me. She was like, well, actually, we have 600. I'm like, we mean we. I have 300 something in debt. You have 300 something in debt. And then I quickly got schooled to the us with our finances. And then that's how I started to grasp. I was like, oh, we have almost $700,000 in student loan debt.
Yeah.
Okay, I see how it is.
Yeah. I mean, but for me, that was important to be able to combine our finances. I know, different couples do it different ways, but we actually combine our finances. I figured if I'm going to build a life with a person, then part of that life is going to include the resources that we have together. Mm-hmm. And so we can't build resources together if we are doing everything apart. So we tackle the debt basically in a way such that we didn't necessarily divide and conquer, but we actually pooled our resources together. And I think being on the same page financially helped us actually tackle the debt in a much quicker time frame than we originally had planned.
So you guys both have MBAs and MDs, right?
Yeah. Well,
DOs.
we're DOs, so
Doctors
Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine.
So I guess going to medical school and doing the residency, that wasn't enough. You wanted to go to school some more.
It's never enough.
Alphabet soup.
Did you always know that you were going to do things outside of medicine? Was that the plan from the beginning or no?
No. Well, at least for me, I didn't.
Yeah, me either.
I got my MBA because I just thought that after I finished my training, I was going to open up a practice. And if I get an office manager and I hire someone to take care of the finances, I just wanted to know what that stuff really meant. That was it. Mm-hmm. But halfway through our MBA, that's when Medicare Part D came out under the Bush administration. And there was a lot of health policy discussions that we were having. And although we were learning all the stuff that most MBA people would learn, all the basic stuff, I found myself and she found herself really fascinated by policy. And I think also for me, I really found myself understanding that, I thought that I was this big person who was in the center of the healthcare system. And I'm really this small little, almost like a cog in a wheel of this entire complex. And that was really a stark understanding while in medical school, while getting this MBA of where I fit. And that kind of started me on this road of, okay, how is it that I can kind of just flap my wings and do things a little differently? Or the reason of why I wanted to go into medical school while I was in medical school was starting to kind of clip. What I'm expecting is not going to be how I am going to end up. So I need to do something differently. So that was like the beginning of all of that.
Yeah. I mean, it was the same with me. Like he said, I got so interested in policy that actually at the last 2 months of medical school, I was able to do a health policy rotation. So I spent 2 months out in Washington, D.C. When I graduated, again, I did OBGYN residency, but after my residency, I actually went out to Atlanta at the Morehouse School of Medicine and I did a health policy fellowship out there. And so same thing, you start to realize, doctors don't actually run the healthcare system. They're just the worker bees, and so you realize that, well, you have some options in terms of how you want to fit into the healthcare system. And it just started to look, like he said, very different for me when I was pre-med to now, where I had graduated and realized the healthcare system, the way that a doctor fits into the healthcare system isn't actually what I thought.
So prior to making the decision to aggressively go after your student loan debt, what were your monthly payments like?
What monthly payments?
You
have to pay monthly payments in order to have monthly payments.
Well, I leave it to you like this. When I got out of deferment, the payment that they wanted. It was just something exorbitant that I couldn't afford. And that's when I said, okay, can I defer? And they said, no. I was like, what do I do next to get you from calling me? Because I got to go to a case, or there's this things that I got to do to kind of finish residency. And they said, you can forbear. And I was like, well, what's that? And they explained it to me, and I still didn't really understand. All I knew is that they were going to stop calling me. So I just forbeared. And I did that for the next 5 years. And then once we finished and we started getting our paycheck, we get a coupon book that shows how much of the payments we should be making. So we started making the payments, and then we start realizing that literally, if you look at the payment, 90% of it was going to interest and the rest would go to principal. But also at the same time, our principal wasn't decreasing much at all. So that really was like, something is going on with this payment. And we put into a calculator and we kind of started following what the standard payment options would be based off of what Sally Mae and Navient and Nelnet was saying. So we would put into a calculator what our total loan was. We put in what all of our interest rates were. And it said if we followed their payment plan, which would be at the end of 20 years, we'd owe like $1.2 million, or we would have ended up paying $1.2 million.
Yeah.
And we're just like, wait,
and I
what?
was like, I'm not paying $1.2 million for tuition. That's
Crazy.
out like that. Yeah, it's done, right? Because at that point, I kind of liken it to a carton of milk. If you pay interest on a carton of milk that you've already drunk, you know what I mean? How much more are you getting out of that carton of milk? So we had already finished our education. We were practicing already. There's nothing more that we were going to get out of the universities that we attended. So why are we paying so much interest? And for me, that was a huge pain point. I just felt like I'm paying $1.2 million of tuition for a school that I had not been to in like 20, 30 years at the end of the payment plan. And for me, it just was a waste of money. And so that's when we decided, nope, we got to go to work. And we literally went to work.
Well, even prior to that, the big inflection point was we realized that we were paying a little too much for insurances. So we were paying a lot for disability insurance, especially Renee being a woman. The rates are a little bit higher for women, or way higher for women than for men. We were paying into a whole life insurance plan that really wasn't designed in our favor. I'll just leave it to you like that. It wasn't designed in our favor. We weren't being really good stewards with our money. Once again, we weren't spending a lot like on consumer things, but we weren't being intentional with the money. So it came to a point where we started looking at our budget, so to speak. We didn't really have a budget back then. And we realized that literally we were only making minimum payments to our student loans. And we talked to the person who arranged or made the arrangements for our whole life plan. And we said, look, something needs to change. And also at the same time, this is us talking to him. You haven't really met with us to discuss, now that we are married, like changing beneficiaries. Do we need a better plan? Do we need nothing? It was just dead silent. So his answer back to us after we told him why we would like to get rid of our whole life or decrease it is, you guys need to budget better. Right. And we were really frustrated about that. We didn't like that answer. But in the whole scheme of things, he was actually right. So what we ended up doing is we went back and looked at all the income that was coming in. And then we also combined that and looked at it with all of the expenses that were coming out. And we just said, you know what? It's time to budget whole life out of our life. So we budgeted him out and we budgeted that plan out. And we became really, really intentional. It was a very spirited discussion that we had as to how we're going to pay for debt. And the other thing too also is it wasn't just student loan debt. I'm telling you, she had some debt that she owed to the IRS. I had a townhome condo that was $170,000 that I was paying a mortgage on,
which was now worth $50,000.
No, at one point. Bubble. At one point, it was worth $50,000.
Right, at one point,
it's back up to like 120 at that point. Either way, I had a mortgage for 170. So we're talking about being almost close to almost $900,000 just in debt. And we don't own a home. We don't have a fancy car. Right. So this was a very, very interesting, stark, jarring time for us.
Yeah. And people think that, well, you're physicians, you're going to make a whole bunch of money. And it's like, yeah, but we were broke. If you looked at our net worth, we were literally in the negative. I mean, there was no way that we were making $900,000 between the income that we both had. So we were actually broke. And that really just pushed us to, again, be more intentional with our money, actually start budgeting instead of doing this mental math in our heads. It's hard to do mental math between two people, right? You might be able to get away with it on your own. But if he's swiping his card and I'm swiping my card and we're on different ends of town, then whatever math I'm doing in my head is always going to be incorrect. And so we just got really intentional and started figuring out what our priorities were. And that's when we figured out that our first priority was going to be to pay off debt.